that guy's a movie star. He's going to be incredible in everything he does, and so far he has been. I look forward to everything he ever does. He's just amazing. I'm a fan of his. He's just great. Yeah. But yeah, I wanted a little less CGI, I wanted a little less giant battle at the end, I wanted a little less exposition. I just wanted a little less film, I think. There's a lot here. There's too much, too ambitious. Just tone it down by half an hour, maybe. I'd have been fine with this. I just wanted it to end.
Or I don't know if it would have been any better if they would have changed the format a little bit to have like maybe a half hour of at the beginning where they squeeze all the exposition stuff into, and then the rest of it just be, the action adventure stuff instead of sprinkling the exposition bits throughout the film.
Yeah, I think they need to start with that opening fight with Nicole Kidman. Great. Just to keep some of the action in there. And then, front load more of the exposition, back load more of the action. And that would have been fine, I think. I've been distracted this whole time, but I've been distracted because you and I have been friends for a while now. And you know that I've done a podcast dedicated to Deep Blue Sea, one chapter at a time. And its 2 sequels. Don't worry about the sequels. That first film. We did 35 chapters on that. You were not on any of those chapters. This is the first thing I've done on the podcast. So you're actually, during our Deep Blue Sea adjacent film section, you're the first guest we've had who hasn't been on a previous episode. The reason you've not been on a previous episode is because you have not seen a Deep Blue Sea film, and I take this as an affront that you haven't. Why? What's going on? Why? Why did you do this to me? What's going on? Answer me.
I don't have a good I don't have a good answer for you. I don't have a joke answer for you. It's just I haven't watched it. I know I am aware of you talking about your love for this film well before starting a podcast dedicated to it. It's just one of those things where it's never really come up. It's never come up in my radar. I'm not a huge horror movie fan. I mean, I like most of the ones that I've seen. I don't seek out a lot of horror movies. I'm more drawn towards the Asian horror movies, and even less so. Like I'm not a bad horror, or I'm not a cheesy horror movie guy either. I like the good, well done horror movies, and some of the horror comedies like Shaun of the Dead and Tucker and Dale versus Evil. Those are a lot of fun. Wow. And I'm not one of those who's afraid of sharks, because I know there's a lot of people who they watched Jaws as a kid and that scarred them for life.
Several of our previous guests, yes.
I'm not one of those either.
No, same.
But I also don't have the childlike fascination for sharks either. Like I'm not one of those who binges Shark Week every time, the 2 or 3 times a year it comes up on TV.
Yeah.
It's just, it's just not ever something that I've sought out. It's one of those where I've considered, because my other podcast, Filmwise, it's about bringing guests on and sharing with me movies that they love that I've never seen before. And I've always, had it in the back of my mind where, if I ever get you on to that show again, that would be the perfect film.
It would be, but I don't know how I would talk about Deep Blue Sea for just half an hour, as opposed to a day and a half. But yeah, obviously I jest. There's too many films. I think we can both agree. There's just too many films out there to see everything. Hence why we're doing this whole Deep Blue Sea adjacent run, where we got to the end of covering 3 Deep Blue Sea films over the course of 55 chapters. And I hadn't seen The Shallows, or the Jaws sequels, 47 Meters Down and its sequel. Every film we're talking about, most of Rennie Harlin's films. they all just kind of escaped me. But I spent 10 consecutive weeks talking about Deep Blue Sea 2, which, if you don't like bad horror movies, then you should probably avoid Deep Blue Sea 2. It's fun if you talk about it for 10 consecutive weeks. If you just watch it once, it's terrible. But obviously, I don't think Deep Blue Sea is a cheesy horror comedy, but there are other people who would argue that it is. But I still think it's a perfect film that I would happily talk about on a future podcast. But if that doesn't happen, then you should seek it out.
I mean, if I describe it based on what I am aware of it already, I think horror comedy would be what comes to mind, because, you know, the two big things that I know about it is that Samuel L. Jackson has the scene where he's given a speech and then the giant shark comes up and eats him in the middle of it.
Yep.
And Ice Cube,
LL Cool J.
LL Cool J, the other 90s rapper.
What?
He plays a chef with a pet parrot.
Yep.
And I believe the parrot gets eaten at one point.
It does. And then LL Cool J, his name is Preacher, Sherman Preacher Dudley. He retaliates to the shark and he kills the shark. With his kill line is, "You ate my bird," and then he kills the shark with a room full of you need to watch it, but yeah, he tries to hide in his own oven, and the shark manages to turn the oven on. So he breaks out of the oven with an little axe, so he's leaking gas into the room. He makes it to the other side of the room, and he throws a lighter in, so the shark explodes in a big fireball. He's like, "You ate my bird!" Flick, throw, boom. It's an iconic scene.
You're saying it's not a comedy.
It's genuinely not. All of these scenes are played sincerely. There are a couple of laughs, like some of the interactions with him and the bird. The bird swears a lot, calls him like fat butt, that kind of thing. So, and there's the relationship between Preacher and Michael Rappaport's in it, so it's not an entirely serious film. There are some comedic moments, but it is not a comedy, I would say. It could certainly be viewed as such. The Sam Jackson death scene is wonderfully overwrought, with a choral, as a choir singing in the background when he dies, which you can definitely draw some comedy from. But again, it's played as a very sincere scene. And yes, it's a wonderful film. You should watch it. Deep Sea 3 is also very good. I would recommend Deep Sea 3 as well. Not so much Deep Sea 2. And we're looking forward to Deep Sea 4 just as soon as it's announced. Okay, so did you have any other notes on Aquaman? Anything else you wanted to mention about this film?
No, I think we pretty much covered everything. I guess, you know, we touched upon the kaiju, the Julie Andrews kaiju, but I do kind of love that he doesn't defeat it by defeating it in combat. It's like he just talks to it, and he's like, "Oh, you can talk to me? Oh, cool, let's be friends."
Yeah, hey, cool, someone I can talk to. You seen Deep Blue Sea? Let's talk about it. Yeah, I like that too. And then the thing's like 2.5 miles long, or 2.5 kilometers long, one of the two, I can't remember. It's maybe one of the, outside of like the World Eater from the Transformers or Fantastic Four films, it's maybe the biggest creature I've seen on a film. It's huge. And it almost feels like it's a very unfair battle at the end, where we just have this creature the size of a small island facing up against regular sized beings. But I suppose that's every Godzilla film, really, isn't it? So good. Well, what I'd like to do on all of these films is compare them to Deep Blue Sea in some way. Just make a note of every parallel. I'll try not to spoil things, but then you don't really mind spoilers, I know. So there is an opening storm in this film, and there's a storm in Deep Blue Sea, where things go awry after that happens. The stare down that Nicole Kidman has with Tamara Morrison's puppy did remind me of a similar stare down between Preacher and his bird. There's like a head bobbing side to side motion that reminded me of that. The most visual parallel is the scene where Aquaman, when young Arthur is in the aquarium with his school, and then he stood in front of this giant window, and a shark swims up behind him and tries to break it, which is exactly what happens in Deep Blue Sea, with Not in the same fashion. The shark doesn't run into the window to break it. It propels something or someone in to break it, but the glass kind of breaks in the same way. So that was a very similar visually seen. The character of Aquaman. Oh no, sorry. The character of Manta, Yahya Abdul-Mateen, is a muscular guy who strides through steam in the submarine, as indeed is Aquaman, which Thomas Jane does a great deal of in Deep Blue Sea. He likes to strut through his steam. There's a lot of submarine
does that
door.
a lot, and a slight plug for me. He does that in the movie The Mist as well, which is the next episode of Filmwise coming out soon.
With Justin Gott, friend of the show.
Yeah,
we had Justin and his co-host Pete on for a sequence in Deep Blue Sea, and they're going to be on here soon to talk about The Descent. Well, soon, who knows? There's no schedule yet, but they'll be on eventually to talk about The Descent. And I'm looking forward to that episode because I really love The Mist. And yes, Thomas Jane, I don't think he strides through, he's more like cowering in fear through The Mist in that one, as well he should do. Speaking of giant creatures and things, there's a freaking huge one in that one. There's a lot of the action in Aquaman takes place in a submarine where there's lots of those wheel doors being opened and closed, which we get a lot of in Deep Blue Sea. If you're wondering, Mark did a count of, I think there's like 28 door openings and closing in the hour and a half of Deep Blue Sea, which is a lot compared to most films. There's a lot of exposition in both films. Susan talking about her dad, Janice talking about the layout of Aquatica and everything going on there. There's a lot of exposition in Aquaman, every other scene. You mentioned Mira Amber Heard chops off a guy's hand during a fight, and Stellan Skarsgård loses a hand in Deep Blue Sea. The film starts with an underwater logo with like a rippling effect to it. Always appreciate that. And most blatant connection to the franchise, Michael Beach is in both of them. He's in this as Manta's dad, and he's in Deep Blue Sea 2, and he doesn't survive either of the films. Unless you like my headcanon of the top half of him survives Deep Blue Sea 2, and is now a robot in Deep Blue Sea 4. Looking forward to it. So, that's how they're connected, and the other thing I like to do is work out, is this film deeper and bluer than Deep Blue Sea? Did I wake up in a cold sweat this morning realizing I hadn't done this yet? Yes, I did. Did I spend too much time today trying to work out how deep and blue Aquaman is? Yes, I did. So you haven't seen Deep Blue Sea, but do you reckon Aquaman is overall deeper and bluer than Deep Blue Sea? If I were to tell you that Deep Blue Sea is on average about 47.5 feet deep and about 31% blue, where do you think Aquaman would sit alongside that?
they do spend a lot of time underwater, and the underwater Atlantis is, they really pump up the contrast. So I feel like Aquaman could very well be bluer, and it's definitely deeper because the hidden sea is in the pop-up title card says the center of the earth.
It is definitely deeper. I'll give you that. I tried to work out where Atlantis would be, and all I could find out is it's somewhere in the North Atlantic Sea. So I looked at the average depth of the North Atlantic, which is about 3.6 kilometers deep, which is a long old way. So, and that's the average. It could be deeper, could be shallower. I just went for the average. But then, yes, when they go into the trench, they say the center of the Earth, but I didn't think they'd be like right in the center. So instead, they're off the coast of Sicily. So I looked at the maximum depth of places in the Mediterranean Sea, which is about 5.2 kilometers deep. And I figured that's generous enough. So that works out as an average of just over 3 kilometers deep, or 10,000 feet deep, which is significantly the deepest film we have covered. The Abyss was on average just under 3,000 feet deep. I thought we wouldn't get anywhere deeper than The Abyss. We've more than tripled that. My graph is ridiculous at this point in terms of most of the films are just on the 0 axis. Now, I've zoomed out so far, and we've got cliffhanger up in the air, then a little step down for The Abyss, giant step down for Aquaman. This whole thing is just pointless now. And in terms of how blue it is bluer than Deep Blue Sea. As I said, Deep Blue Sea is about 31% blue. Aquaman, 57%. I thought it would be bluer, just given how much time they spend underwater. But and my rule for Deep Blue Sea was, if they're underwater, it's basically 100% blue. They put a blue filter on it. But there's a lot of stuff in Aquaman where they're underwater, but there's also like a red filter on it when they're, because of the lava and the explosion.